As usual, in the news, there's a lot of talk about politics, and you're probably wondering, how is this going to affect my portfolio? Well, today, I'm here to tell you that I have no clue, and no one has any clue. But with that knowledge that no one knows what the future holds, how can you manage risk in your portfolio, especially as you prepare for retirement, because eventually one day you're going to live off that portfolio. So in this episode, I'm going to give you 7 ways that you can manage investment risk in your portfolio, so hopefully one day you can retire with confidence. The cool thing about this is that you're probably doing some of these things already. Now, I'm not a doom and gloom type of person, and this is not that kind of video, but risk management is just a prudent part of building a portfolio that is suitable for someone to live on throughout their retirement years. So let's get started with the first one right here on the Canadian Money Roadmap podcast. Okay, so the first one that you can do, and you're probably doing this one already, some of you maybe not, but diversification. This is the simplest thing that you can do to make sure that you're positioned to catch returns wherever they might be. Diversification is just the idea of not having your eggs all in one basket. Historically, Canadians have more of their eggs in the Canadian basket. Lately, what I've seen is more people have a lot of them in the US basket, and I would say diversification looks beyond the borders of North America even, and includes some parts of Europe and Asia, and some opportunities overseas. The reason you want to have diversification is that inevitably when things change in the world, there's going to be winners and losers, but it's really, really difficult to figure out who they're going to be, even if it seems obvious. Oftentimes, it doesn't really play out exactly how we thought, and you can see that here, where you can see how different investment styles have performed differently from year to year, and different countries in the developed world and in the emerging market world too. There's no reliable winners year after year after year, and so diversification increases the odds that you're at least vaguely right instead of precisely wrong. Diversification doesn't guarantee positive returns every single year, or necessarily maximize your long-term returns, but it increases the odds that you'll participate in the returns wherever they might be in the world. Number 2 is a rules-based implementation of your portfolio. That sounds like a little bit of word salad there, but essentially the idea is that emotions are all a part of us, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, but in the investing world, being emotional with decision-making can usually work against us. So when you implement a rules-based portfolio, you let the rules decide how and when you make decisions with that portfolio, instead of gut feelings or news headlines or the famous brother-in-law that always has the best ideas when it comes to investing. A rules-based approach makes sure that you only have to make good decisions a handful of times instead of evaluating every day, every hour, whatever, as the stock market changes to see what you should be doing with the components of your portfolio. There's all sorts of different ways to have a rules-based system, but most of them will have consistent allocations to certain countries, certain parts of the market, or an investing approach like indexing, and that can be a great way to take the emotions out of the investment decisions. These are often utilized in what I would call an all-in-one fund or an ETF that has diversification and rebalancing built into it already. This is a very, very simple way to get a rules-based portfolio in your long-term investing accounts so that you don't have to make too many decisions. You might just be adding money to it on a regular basis, and that's probably the only decision that you really have to make. Having a well-thought-out investment strategy implemented at all times is great. But to understand it a little bit better, the opposite can be a little bit more glaring. Perhaps you read a scary headline about some political decision that's coming from a faraway place and how that might impact Canadian investors or American investors. So you take that information and say, oh boy, I better get all of my money out of that country, even though that doesn't necessarily impact the stock market in those countries. It might, who knows? But you think Canadian stocks are going to be worthless, and so you get rid of all your Canadian stocks and either you sit on cash or you buy something else. And who knows, maybe a few weeks later, that scary headline doesn't actually come to pass, and then the stock market rallies in response. All these different things can happen, and so what you want to avoid is what I call the Michael Scott 3 vasectomies approach. If you ever watched The Office, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but this is the snip, snap, snip, snap, snip, snap approach to portfolio management, and generally it just doesn't work. Carl Richards simplifies this by saying, sell low, buy high, repeat until broke. And this is exactly what happens if you use news headlines and gut feelings to trade in your portfolio. You don't have any more information than the market does. You don't have any speed advantages or any sort of technical advantage that large institutions and portfolio managers don't have. So if you're trying to use public information to try to beat the market, you have to get lucky to end up doing it. Getting lucky can happen, but it's not a plan. And so a rules-based strategy can help take that necessity of luck out of the equation entirely so that you can just invest with a prudent strategy at all times. The third one is a simple one, is bonds. You've heard of bonds before. Adding bonds to a portfolio generally acts like an airbag on the stock portion of the portfolio, so it lessens the impact if there's a crash. In most years, bonds have a lower correlation to the stock market, and so when you have a component like bonds in there and they don't move exactly at the same speed at the same time, it can really stabilize the portfolio values over time and make things a little bit easier to stomach. Bonds aren't typically a way that you would increase your expected return of your portfolio, but they would reduce the expected volatility in your portfolio. Looping in bonds into your portfolio is really simple, and you can still do that as part of a rules-based approach. Number 4 is taking the bonds idea and taking it a step further and having some cash in the portfolio. Sometimes I've called this a cash wedge. Some people call it a bucket strategy. Some people call it a war chest strategy. But essentially the idea is that part of your portfolio can be in cash, and that's generally the part of the portfolio where you withdraw from on a regular basis, so that when you are spending your money from your portfolio, you're not forced to sell things when they might be down at any given time. Many of my retired clients implement a version of this in their portfolios, especially the part of the portfolio that they're withdrawing from currently. There's usually a part of the portfolio that they're not touching for a really long time, and we wouldn't necessarily have a cash wedge in that part. But for the part that they're withdrawing from on a regular basis, we'd have about a year or two worth of cash in there, so that they can redeem from a place that's not going to be volatile. So if you see the stock market going down, you can look at your account and say, okay, well, the part that I'm actually living on is pretty stable and it's not really going anywhere. Depending on how you implement this, you could also take it the other way, and this is kind of that war chest approach, where if you have enough cash and the market takes a tumble, you could take some of that cash and buy some more stocks and do some rebalancing that way. I don't generally carry that much cash where you could do both, have a safe withdrawal approach with the cash on hand, plus do opportunistic buying, and then that kind of flies in the face of a rules-based strategy. It's really easy to be like, oh, okay, it was down 2%, should I rebalance? You know, it's tougher to set up those rules, but you can do it. You can set up a system that works for you, but generally speaking, I just use a cash wedge as a way to reduce volatility in the portfolio and make sure that everybody's comfortable with how much volatility they have over the short term, meaning in next year or the next 2 years in some cases, because that's actually the money you're going to live on. The rest of it can then have enough time to crawl back out of a potential decline if that happens. And we know we won't have to touch it because we've set aside some cash on hand already. Number 5 is annuities. You probably haven't heard of annuities too much, especially recently because interest rates have been quite low. But annuities are a product that you can buy from an insurance company that essentially just trades cash today for a guaranteed stream of income for the rest of your life. Now, there's many different versions of this and different guarantees that you can have, and sometimes you can have ones that are tied to your spouse as well, some that are indexed to inflation, whatever. So I won't get into the intricacies of all the different products, but that's the main idea. You trade cash today for a guaranteed stream of income for the rest of your life. So if you don't want the volatility of the stock market, but you need to live off something, annuitizing at least part of your portfolio can make a lot of sense. The variables that determine how much you can get from an annuity are largely based on your age, meaning how long the insurance company thinks that you're going to need the payments for, but also the prevailing interest rate environment as well. So when rates are a little bit higher, insurance companies are willing to pay out a little bit more because what they do is they pair their obligation to you in terms of the cash flow to an asset like a long-term government bond to make sure that they're not overly exposed to investment risk themselves, and so that they can remain profitable. So essentially, the higher interest rates are, the higher annuity payments you can expect. And so over the last number of years when interest rates have been really low, annuities haven't paid nearly as much. And so they haven't been as attractive, which is probably why you haven't seen them in the news a whole lot. But Taking a look at annuities as a way to get some money out of the stock market, but still having guaranteed income for life can be really nice, especially for people who don't have a pension of their own. Now, number 6 is a similar but different version of the same thing as buying an annuity. What I'd recommend here is deferring your CPP. Your CPP is a pension, which is, again, it's a guaranteed stream of income for the rest of your life. But by deferring it beyond age 60, most people think about 65 or 60 as the typical starting points, but deferring it gives you a guaranteed increase in your payment for the rest of your life. So the way that we can use this to offset portfolio risk is when you're deferring it in those years, you probably still have to live on something. So the idea there is that you spend your own money first that's perhaps exposed to investment risk while deferring your CPP. So you spend down more of your portfolio, meaning less of your net worth is exposed to investment risk. And in the meantime, their CPP amount is growing every month that you defer it. Then once your payments kick in and you decide to take it, you might have similar amounts of income, but less of it is subject to the ups and downs of the stock market. Now, I understand if you want to rile up people on the internet, there's no better way than to tell them to defer their CPP, so I'll maybe leave that one there. But if you're interested in something like this, I've got a number of videos talking about CPP deferral and some of the benefits of doing that. The last one that I'm going to talk about today is something called options. You might have heard of options before. Essentially, options are a financial derivative that can act either like leverage or like insurance, depending on how you use them. In this context here, I'm going to talk about put options. I'm not really going to explain them because they can be highly complex, but essentially, if done appropriately, put options can be added to your portfolio to add a little bit of insurance. So when the market goes down, and in particular goes down very, very quickly, many put options can actually increase in value. And so it has a negative correlation to the asset that it's tied to. There are a number of mutual funds and ETFs that include options now, but before I could ever recommend that somebody look into them, you have to have a pretty good handle on understanding options in general, because there are other types of options that can do the opposite of insurance, and they can magnify your returns in the other direction too, which can be good if that's what you're looking for, whatever. But I won't get into this one too much, besides suggesting that if you're particularly concerned about what we would call tail risk, so the oddball stuff, the black swan risk idea, put options can be something that can be looped into your portfolio to even profit from those types of scenarios. Before doing any of these things with your portfolio, I'd highly recommend that you consult with a professional, especially if you're already using one, before going out and buying things like options or any specific strategies, even ones that I've described here. Even though they're designed to minimize investment risk, sometimes they might not be appropriate for your situation. So if you're someone that needs to take a look at your portfolio and you're wondering if you can manage some investment risk on a go-forward basis, here are 7 ways that you can do that. It's diversification. Plain and simple, that's the easiest one you can do. Having a rules-based implementation on the portfolio keeps emotions out of the equation to keep you from making poor decisions at a poor time. Adding bonds to the portfolio to minimize correlation to the stock market. Adding cash to withdraw from a less volatile or a non-volatile part of the portfolio. Having an annuity so you don't have to rely on the portfolio for a certain part of your income. Deferring government benefits like CPP to ensure that you have a backstop of guaranteed income later on if you've been spending down your portfolio. And then finally, potentially looking at something like a put option derivative on a mutual fund or an ETF to help minimize tail risk in the extreme cases of market declines. If this episode was valuable for you, feel free to leave me a comment. If you're on Spotify, if you're watching on YouTube, that would be great. Leaving a rating or review is really helpful to make sure that other people find content just like this. If you've never done a financial plan before and eventually you'd like to retire with confidence too, you can click on the link below in the show notes to find out a little bit more information about what it looks like to work with me, and you could book an intro call and we can chat about it. Thank you for watching or listening to this episode of the Canadian Money Roadmap, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Take care.